Hello to the live attendees as well as the viewers in some asynchronous future. I'm Midori and welcome to another episode, I believe number 31 of Consent Dojo, monthly program where we dive into specific areas where I get to interview and learn from amazing people who have their own particular perspective on consent and creating a consentful culture. And for those of you who've not been here before, great. Thank you. Check out the back episodes. And before we dive in, I thought I'd share a artwork, but actually, you know what? I want to bring on a special guest on. And here we go. Hi, Amanda.
Hi.
And welcoming Amanda Jepson, pronoun she, her, and special guest that I am delighted as a colleague. And you're one of the co-founders of Sexual Health Alliance or Respark. I know I'm getting that.
Respark Foundation. Yep.
Great. Okay. And I intersect with you through Sexual Health Alliance and all the various good places. And I would like to introduce you, and hopefully, I know I'm not going to get all the things that you do because you do a hell of a lot. Okay. So this is the official bit. Amanda's a certified sex therapist, a board-certified clinical sexologist, and licensed professional counselor in the state of Colorado. She's one of the co-founders of Respark Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit serving survivors of sexual harm, a clinical therapist at UCCS Veterans Health and Trauma Clinic. What's UCCS?
University of Colorado, Colorado Springs.
Thank you. And an adjunct lecturer for University of Colorado, Denver. She's been working with survivors for over a decade and works to be an intersectional and sex positive provocateur, hoping to instigate thoughtful dialogue and dispel shame. Now, my personal perspective on Amanda is a really, really kind and supportive person. So it's been a pleasure to meet you and get to know you. And I lured you in and you consented to being on Consent Dojo because it is that season that I like to refer to as family trauma season. I want to share an artwork actually. And along with being an educator, my other career is as an artist. And I would like to share this particular installation called The Dining Room. Do you see is it showing up? Okay. And to create this installation, there's a pre-event where I invite people to come and break dishes. It's one by one. It's a very cathartic event. And then I take the broken dishes that we have broken all together and create this, what appears to be from a distance, a shag rug. On the table are four white plain plates that upon closer inspection, you will see that they have been previously broken and glued together. Let me do a little better visual description of this. It is a plain room with white wall and wooden floors. There is what appears to be a large square shag rug, which is actually made out of shattered crockery and plates. There are 4 chairs, kind of a modern shaker style, and in wood, and a simple table with the aforementioned 4 plates that have all been imperfectly glued back together. I call it the dining room. And well, you know, every what was that saying? Yeah, that every happy family has like no stories, but every unhappy family has a drama and story. Was that Chekhov or Dostoevsky? I will have to be fact checked on this and the correct quote. But I thought this artwork of mine, and this artwork is actually in my art portfolio site, which is ranshin.com. I thought this might be apropos for today. What do you think?
Absolutely.
What do you see when you're looking at this? And how do you, from your perspective, interpret this?
For me,
Yeah.
I will say this is definitely the season where clients are already talking about the drama going on with their families or what they're anticipating. And this is such a fantastic visual representation of having to pretend like everything is fine when you really feel like uh you're walking on eggshells, or in this situation walking on broken shards. People have to pretend like everything is fine. You have to sit down and have that meal and not pretend like all of the bad stuff is sitting right there in the room with you.
Yeah. So opening with this and stop sharing, and now back to you. Okay, it is family trauma season, and what the hell does that have to do with consent and boundaries?
Exactly. That's why you invited me on. Thank you so much for having me. It's one of those things that when people have to go back and be around their families, a lot of people are talking about how do they navigate being background family that doesn't do consent, when they're having to be background family that is high pressure, high stress, high trauma, and navigating that with the healthy work that they've been doing and the consent that they've been learning to communicate.
And I'm guessing that lately your clients have been tapping into your expertise a bit.
Yep. Yeah. Clients have been coming in and talking about anticipating traveling or hosting family and having to really bring that present self, that self that they've been putting back together in some ways, while being back around the family of origin that may have added to the trauma experiences that they've had. Um, it's interesting talking to clients and even looking at the research. You'll hear me say the research shows quite a bit, but that people are anticipating seeing family, hearing family. About 40% of people are talking about that they feel like it's likely that they're going to get into a fight with their family, and over half of those fights are going to be about the family trauma and family drama that has happened in the past. So it's not just my clients, it's everybody that's anticipating this.
Hmm. I'm gonna back step just a bit again to like why consent, because so often today discussion of consent circles around specifically around sexual, erotic, and intimate relationships, or maybe some of you have come into Consent Dojo thinking around kink and sexual context. But consent, as those of you who've been with Consent Dojo for a long time, know that consent making is an everyday interaction.
Mhm.
Now, in to give a more, can you give a little more concrete example of consent and boundary at that dinner table, and fictionalize some characters?
Absolutely. So big ones that I hear over and over again is family members wanting to hug other family members, specifically the kids at the table, right? So grandma wants to give the kids a hug and the kids aren't feeling being touched. So grandma might start in on the guilt tripping. Or, Uncle Frank is trying to talk politics at the table. And you're and you're not ready for that. Or Aunt Mary asking about when you're finally going to have kids. And so family a lot of times forgets to get consent for touch, for conversation, for topics, and it happens a lot.
Actually, the touch and the hug one, that really resonated for me because I grew up in Japan, not exactly a huggy culture, okay?
Hmm.
And in a German Japanese household, also doubly not huggy. And I would come over to visit relatives as a little one in the summer times, right? During summer vacation. And oh, first of all, my American relatives, mostly white, they seemed like really huge to me, very huge, and they would come in for a hug, for this contact that, I mean, there were these big people coming in for this hug. And it was paralyzing and it was terrifying. And I didn't have the words to explain it.
Mhm.
And there was that. And also, part of my family, my immediate family, uh, agnostic intellectuals, um, me more on the Zen side, but part of the family is devoutly Catholic. Let me tell you that Uncle Frank and the politics thing. But as a little kiddo, um, being asked to say grace at the table,
Yeah.
and I chose to remain silent.
Yeah.
Because first of all, I didn't know what to say, and uh, I had a lot of discomfort around Christianity because my first exposure to Christianity was like, without context, seeing a dead guy nailed to the wall.
Mhm.
And I didn't see that. So, ah, um, so I chose not to say grace. And that apparently layered on the furthermore black sheepness. So, a couple of things there. So, tell us, can we survive this season?
Yes. The biggest thing that I tell people is yes, you can survive this season. It it takes a lot of foresight and forethought though to prepare. And I see that's the thing that people aren't thinking about is what to do before they see their family.
Oh my God. Okay, so I am heading back to Japan soon. And on the plane, as we get closer and closer, US over here, Japan over here, and the plane is getting closer and closer, I can feel my body stressing out
Hmm.
and my head starting to do weird things. And I know we didn't necessarily discuss this, but symptoms?
Hmm. Yep. One of the things that I do tell people is paying attention to your own personal warning signs. That if you're feeling that anxiety increase, if you are feeling that apprehension increases, is paying attention to what your body's telling you, what your mind's telling you, what your emotions are telling you. And so I was totally prepared for this question. So when
Ah,
we're talking about the warning signs, is you might notice it in your body, like you were talking about. So you might notice muscles tensing up, right? Shoulders going up. You might notice your heart racing or you starting to hyperventilate a little bit. Yeah, people might talk about like their stomach starts to get like they might notice their stomach churning a little bit, or it almost feels like there's a rock in your stomach. People will talk about emotional warning signs. Their anxiety goes up. They might notice they're more agitated or irritated. Easily frustrated comes up with people, like their threshold kind of goes down. And then there might be some behavioral signs. So you might start pacing, you might start fidgeting. People might start, especially if we're talking about holidays and family, they might start hitting the wine a little bit harder, or going out to the shed with their cousins. Yep, exact. So we might notice people shutting down or starting to yell, kind of opposite sides of the activation. So it's really about knowing for you personally as an individual, what are the signs that you're starting to get stressed or overwhelmed by that family experience?
so identifying what our bodies are telling us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay, then what? Then what should I do?
Yep. So if you are already in that place that you notice the warning signs happening, and you're there with family, or you're almost there with family, we need to look at calming the nervous system down. And there are some really basic ways that we can do that. Distractions, a good one. So you can pull up YouTube and watch some funny videos if you're on the plane. Yep. Make look at your phone. I do tell people we've got these tiny little computers in our pockets, so let's use them to our advantage.
Cat
So
videos. My
yep.
favorite, funny
Yep.
cat videos.
Cat videos, dog videos. I hear that one a lot from people. I will tell people look at pictures of your favorite people or your favorite vacation that you've ever been on.
Hmm.
Um,
No, Though the problem with this,
Mm-hmm.
the cat videos are good, but lately, the way the world is, it's sure as hell easy to, like, get to the doom scrolling and the yeah, the outrage scrolling and the disaster scrolling.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And so we want stuff that isn't on our phone as well. Big ones there is coming into your body. So I tell people when we're talking about grounding, there's physical grounding. Physical grounding might be if you're sitting in a chair, even if you're on the plane, grabbing the arms of the chair and sitting with your feet flat on the
I don't
floor,
have
feeling your bottom on the chair, your back against the chair. It might mean you can do a progressive muscle relaxation. So that might mean tensing your shoulders and relaxing them, tensing your core and relaxing it, tensing your legs and relaxing it. It might mean focusing on your breathing. And so that might mean breathing in, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4. A really great one that I recommend is a little bit different, but it's you breathe in for 4, you hold for 7, and you exhale for 8. Um, and so what that might look like is in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And the reason why that one in particular is really useful is your breath in is shorter than your breath out. So each time you complete a cycle of that 4, 7, 8, your heart rate's going to slow, your respiration is going to slow, and that oxygen level that usually can signal fight or flight, we're going to bring that down so you can actually relax. I don't recommend doing that one if you're operating heavy machinery, but if you're sitting on an airplane and somebody else is driving you, go for it. And the nice thing about breath work is you can do that while you're sitting at the table with your family members, and nobody's really going to notice that you're focusing on your breathing. And breathing can be a great way to regulate the nervous system, but you can also distract yourself by doing those numbers.
Nice. And okay. I've also on the breathing thing, I've also heard the visualization of like breathe along the points of a square.
Mm-hmm.
That
Yep.
one's interesting. Yeah.
Yep. If you've got the ability to use your phone, one of the things that I do tell people is you can save various breathing gifts that actually do the counting for you. So if you're in a stressful situation and you want to check out and look at your phone, but not doom scroll, you can just open up your breathing gifts and those can help you as well.
What else?
What else? So if you've got the ability to prepare beforehand, so you're not already in front of your family and stressed out, there are some big things that we can do. The major ones that we're going to look at is focusing on, I know this word gets overused, but the self-care and self-compassion. And so making sure that you are eating before you're around your family members so that you're nourishing your body, making sure that you're hydrated, making sure that you've gotten to the best of your abilities good sleep, just so that your system is as prepared as it can be. Sometimes we overlook those things, especially if we're doing travel. We don't usually sleep the best when we're traveling. We don't always eat the best when we're traveling, but doing the best that you can in that situation to kind of set yourself up helps quite a bit. Some other things that I definitely recommend is if you've got the ability to do some exercise and that works well with your body, just a little bit, because we know that physical exertion can help kind of bring down that anxiety level. It gives your anxiety a pathway out. So that can work really well. We usually also recommend avoiding alcohol and drug use because that kind of compromises our, we'll say, problem solving skills in those moments around stressful family. One of the final ones that I do recommend, and I work with my clients on this one, is managing expectations. So if we're going into the event, telling ourselves it's all going to be fine, it's all going to be perfect, we're going to set ourselves up for some failure there. If we're telling ourselves though that it's going to be a disaster, sometimes we're only going to notice the bad things that are happening, or we might sort of unintentionally steer things in a way that it goes chaotic. So really working on just being open to experiencing whatever's coming up as it's coming up, and kind of setting aside that expectation piece to the best of our abilities.
The self-care thing, I know that oftentimes people think of, or it gets marketed that it's like, candles, massage, and like bath. Sometimes self-care is like going out to the backyard and banging the hell out of something.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. No one's looking. The other one too I tell people is step into the bathroom. It's a place that you can already take a break during a gathering, running your hands under cold water, being able to touch the cold of the porcelain of the sink. I don't always recommend heat in those settings, because if you are dissociating from your body at all, you may not notice that you're scalding yourself. So I usually recommend cold water. That can help a little bit. Stepping away into the kitchen and getting a glass of ice water and holding that glass in your hand, being able to notice how cold it is, taking a sip of it and holding that cold water in your mouth for a moment, swallowing it and feeling it drop into your stomach, feeling the temperature change a little bit. Using cold is a really great way to help.
Huh. Oh, something just occurred to me that I do with the kind of the lowering and managing expectations thing, with family of origin kind of stuff, as in my preparation, as the anxiety crossing the Pacific and anxiety is going up. And when it's actually time to see them, and because I'm also performance artist, okay, I am taking on a role. And I have to remind myself that they see me still as 8,
Yep.
and that I will not be 8. I'm not the 8-year-old. And I'm not an 8, and I am a middle-aged Asian woman. I am a middle-aged lady. And
Mm-hmm.
actually, some people are like, why the middle age? Because middle-aged women rock, and middle-aged women ain't got no fucks to give. And so I remind myself that. And so I am middle-aged, no fucks given, Asian woman. Okay, great. And so I do that. And then I listen to Grace Jones.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then I do this facial exercise, right? And this is the bathroom part you reminded me, is like the before going on stage thing.
Loosening up the body.
And then I get like, yeah, that's something I do.
Uh,
Borrowed from acting.
I love it. One of the things that I liked when you mentioned the age piece is, when we talk about families, even if every member of a family that has had kind of a traumatic past goes and does their work, when everybody comes back together, they haven't figured out how to bring that work into the space with them. So we have to understand that when we go back and we are with our family doesn't know the work we've been doing. We don't know the work they've been doing. And so we have to be really intentional in that space to bring ourselves into the present moment, to not fall back into those patterns of when we were 8, but also not treating our family members as though they haven't done the work. And it's almost like we have to relearn how to be with these people in this space. And for people who are struggling with feeling like they're 8 again, it can sometimes be a bit like whiplash to pull ourselves from 8 to middle age, right? And so I oftentimes will recommend to clients walking ourselves up slowly. So if we suddenly feel like we're 8, or we suddenly feel like we're 10, now I'm 12, now I'm 15, now I'm 20. And even taking that moment and slowly walking ourselves back up to our current age can distract us a little bit. Total permission to miss ages that were traumatic if you need to. So skip some years if you need to, but it really does help bring you into the present moment and back into yourself and all of the skills that you have on purpose.
Great. What else?
Other things that can help. So if you are back around your family with a trusted person, a support person, you don't have to regulate on your own. You might be able to do some co-regulation. So if you're really stressed out and you have a partner there, you can ask for a hug, and taking that moment and just being able to be surrounded and get to feel that pressure from somebody that you trust, and just stay and hug until you relax. That can really help. That one can be helpful if you need to step into a different room in order to do it. That can really reset the nervous system a little bit and remind you that you're not doing this alone. So co-regulation is always an option. I always also tell people, let's not forget about the adult timeout. This is not like when you were 8 and you got put in timeout, but an adult timeout is, I am overwhelmed and there's too much going on. So I'm going to give myself permission to step out of this space. And that might be, oh, I'm so full after dinner, I'm going to go walk around the block, and give yourself a couple minutes.
That's a good line. What other alibis for adult timeout?
Adult timeouts might also look like helping clean up. So going into the kitchen and actually giving yourself dish duty, because most people aren't going to take that on. It might mean helping somebody pack up their car and taking your time slowly coming back in. You can
Oh, walk
always,
the dog.
yep, walk the dog, walk the neighbor's dog if you need to. But I do tell people, think about things ahead of time, or those moments when you know your family's patterns of how holiday dinners look. You kind of know those places and spaces where you might be able to sneak away for a couple minutes. So that might mean going into the other room with the kids and hanging out with them. That might mean going and sitting, because grandpa snoozes after dinner. So sitting in the room with him where it's quiet and there's nobody else around. That might mean sneaking into the front room and just taking some minutes in a dark, quiet room to be by yourself if you need to. It's about finding those moments to give yourself space and grace when you're able to.
Question. So I think many of us, and the quote just came back of the quote that I was looking for, and it's from Tolstoy, from Anna Karenina, of happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way.
Mm-hmm.
But I, I know that, and this is also from my coaching students as well as my friends and myself, that many of us have developed in our childhood ways of giving ourselves time out or disappearing
Mm-hmm.
into, say, books or games. And that's, when do we know if, let's say, a book, right? Taking a book and going into the corner and reading a book. When, how do we know when that is a good strategy or not good strategy? Because that may be what I did when I was 8.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think the biggest thing that I tell people is coping strategies. Humans are good at finding them, whether they're healthy or unhealthy. What we want to do is check in and see, how long are we doing this? Now, if you're stepping away from your family and you're picking up a book and suddenly it's 2 hours later, that may not be the healthiest, right? So I oftentimes tell people we're aiming for 5 to 15 minutes for a lot of these coping strategies, to see if we can regulate our bodies again. If we find ourselves getting really, really dysregulated, a fight actually breaks out, or people are yelling, we may need longer, close to 30 minutes. But for most of these, if you're able to see yourself starting to get escalated, or you're noticing the situation is getting escalated, if you can step away for 5 to 15 minutes or go internal for 5 to 15 minutes, but then encourage yourself to come back, that really helps.
It's a good one. Oh, thinking in terms of something that my chosen family and I have done for each other is the lifeline, the
Mm-hmm.
text message. Okay, I am going to go deal with family. Uh, can I call you?
Mm-hmm.
Can I text you? And in some situations, like say Japan or my family in France, that there's time zone difference. So arranging in advance,
Mm-hmm.
okay, can I call you? It could be 2 in the morning.
That's definitely one of those. So when we talk about family in the trauma sense, oftentimes what we're referring to is kind of that family of origin. That's that family that we grew up with. That was that family that oftentimes we don't get to pick. And as we get older, we start noticing that we're picking our family, and that becomes our chosen family. That might be friends, that might be partners, that might be our own kids. And sometimes a few of our family of origin might also end up in that chosen family. This is one of those times that you absolutely can use that chosen family as a lifeline, and thinking about it ahead of time. Who might you need to ask, or who might be willing to be asked? And what might you be able to ask them to do? Whether it's, can I just vent to you and send you that big long text message of, you'll never believe what just happened, so I can get it out. It might be sneaking away to make the phone call for a moment. It can look like all sorts of different things, and thinking about what that might look like and who are the right players to help you with that.
Yeah. Um, so thinking again in terms of my chosen family, there have been several of us that have been, and I seem to have done this a few times, of being emotional support human.
Mhm.
Um, Going to holidays with, as an outsider, to go to holiday with, and not as like a partner, like, oh, hey, here's my friend Midori coming along.
Mhm.
And we've done that for each other,
Mhm.
and that's been interesting. Because it, yeah,
Absolutely. And sometimes people are able to go in person. And if you can have that, that's awesome. The other thing that I bring up to people too is, when we're talking about consent and family, we want to make sure that we're talking about boundaries too, because boundaries really are figuring out what we are and aren't willing to do in a situation, because boundaries really are those ability to have consent opportunities. And I know, since we're here talking about consent, boundaries are a big one. So if we are in a stressful situation, or we're anticipating a stressful situation, sometimes it might mean that we say no if we're asked to join dinner. Or if family is a, dinner and then brunch and then lunch and then dinner, right? A whole weekend, we may pick and choose different parts of the weekend to participate in, and other parts of the weekend to not participate in if we're able to say no. I know that not everybody feels like they're able to say no.
talk to us more about um, recognizing, okay, so in advance, like, this needs to be a boundary that I've not set before.
Mhm.
And how do I make sure I stick to that? How do I recognize
Yeah.
what needs to be a boundary? And how do I commit to that
Mhm.
and not slip back to 8-year-old?
Yeah. Well, first things first, I like defining boundaries for people, because in our society, we have a whole lot of ideas what boundaries are. Really, when we're talking about boundaries, it's our own personal limit. It's how much we're able to offer and what we're not able to offer. And so that boundary is that space right in between there. It's those rules that we have. And a lot of times when we see boundaries represented on TV shows or in books, they might be like, you're not allowed to talk to me that way, right? That's actually not a boundary. That's, we're telling somebody else what they can and can't do. When we're talking about boundaries, that boundary might look like, if you continue to yell at me, I may step out of the room. Or if you continue to yell at me, I may end the conversation, hang up the phone. You're welcome to call me back though, if you want to, talk to me in a different tone. So boundaries really are about how we are going to operate in the space, regardless of what the other person does. And that boundary may include a request of, if you're able to stop yelling at me, I would really appreciate it. If you continue to yell at me, I may leave. And it's really
Hmm.
about understanding that. And it might be, going back to those situations from earlier, if you could please ask me for a hug, that would be really great. Sometimes I'm in the mood for a hug and sometimes I'm not. And I'd like the ability to tell you when I am. It might mean, Uncle Frank, I'd love to have this conversation with you, but I don't think the middle of the Thanksgiving table is the right time to do this. So, maybe you and I can come up with a time to sit down, have coffee, and talk about politics. But right now is not. I'm not feeling it.
And that time would be never.
Uh-huh. Yeah, then you're somehow busy, right?
I have to wash the cat. Um, yeah, okay, so let's take the hug one, right?
Yes.
Because that's one that like oftentimes, so often children are not allowed their bodily autonomy,
Mm.
right? And harking back to my example of that, but I'm sure many of you out there might feel similar to that. All right, so let's say as an adult, I say, I'm not in a space for a hug today. And then the guilt trip.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, tell me how to, and uncle or auntie would be like, well, what's the matter with you?
Mm-hmm.
I've always hugged you. You've always liked it. And I don't understand.
Mhm. Absolutely. So one of the things that I do tell people is to go ahead and re-explain what that boundary is. I definitely hear that right now you're wanting a hug. I'm just not in that space right now, and I love spending time with you. So is there another way that we can share space that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to get hugged? And it might mean, oh, no, thank you. This conversation doesn't feel good right now. And I want to make sure that we get to have good conversations. Depending on the person, we don't want to get into, gentle parenting our parents or gentle parenting our aunts and uncles, because sometimes that can be perceived as being passive aggressive. But we might be able to get close to that line of, no, thank you. This language that you're using right now doesn't feel good. And I'm wondering if we might be able to have a conversation that's going to make you feel loved and attended to, and a conversation that isn't going to make me feel icky and want to step away.
Give us some more possible scripts or lines. I
Absolutely.
like this.
Absolutely. This is another way that you can do it ahead of time, right? Is figuring out what your boundary is and practicing saying it, writing it down beforehand, having a friend that you can run through it. Some other ones might be if somebody is crossing boundaries and commenting on your body or commenting on what you're putting on your plate. Some things that you might want to do is, I'm going to focus on what I want to eat tonight. I'm curious if you can tell me what it is that you're wanting to eat tonight or what you're looking forward to. I kind of distracted them by getting them to talk about themselves.
Ah,
Sometimes a
okay.
good way. That one can be seen as maybe a little bit more passive. You can also say, I'm going to worry about my own plate, and I would really appreciate it if you didn't make comments about it. Some people like to be a little bit more direct and set the boundary that way. And you can play with how strongly you want to set that boundary with that person. And it might be, hey, if you continue to comment on what I'm putting on my plate, I may go into the other room and talk with somebody else, or I may go and eat in the kitchen, because this isn't feeling so great right now.
Okay. You mentioned the on the plate, but also like the body,
Mm.
right? And all right, so give us an example about that pervasive body shaming
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it
and
happens.
some scripts that
Absolutely. Yeah. Families love to talk about bodies, about, somebody's losing weight. So let's comment on it, even if we don't know if it's healthy, or, commenting on how somebody has gained weight. And so sometimes that might look like, what's going on. It looks like you've put on some weight since last year. And a lot of times what I tell people is, I really don't want to talk about my body and weight. That doesn't feel like a healthy way to spend my time. I'm wondering, like, what else has been going on in your life, or do you want to talk about what else has been going on in my life other than what I just look like?
hmm yeah,
And I tend to practice pretty direct lines. There is, my body is not going to be a topic of conversation. This doesn't feel comfortable to me.
let's see. And what else around boundary setting? Because I actually have some other questions as well, but I don't want to miss any of this part about boundary setting and refocusing the conversation.
Absolutely. So the biggest thing that I tell people is, apparently there's an ambulance outside. I don't know if you guys can hear that. So sorry if you can. Biggest thing we're talking about boundaries is you get to figure out what your limit is. And what you can do is tell the other person, this is where I would like for you to honor. So I really don't feel comfortable talking about my body. So I'm wondering, can we talk about something else right now? And if that person keeps coming back to talking about your body or talking about what you're putting on your plate or trying to give you a hug when you've asked for no hugs, you can remind them. I usually say it first gently, but you can get more firm about, again, this is not a topic that I'm comfortable talking about. I'm totally comfortable talking about what I learned in class this semester, or this really great book I've had, or Sally's music performance last week. So you can give them some ideas. And if they do continue to go there, you get to decide how you're going to remove yourself from that situation. And so that might be, I've kind of asked you a couple times to stop talking about my body and you keep coming back to it. So I think I'm going to go in the other room and I'm going to go ahead and talk to Aunt Jane for a little while. But if you want to try again later, please let me know.
Oh, here's another one. What if we recognize that somebody in our family or a gathering is the one having their boundary, or they may not have set a boundary, or there may be okay, so we'll use the hug example. That's a good one. If I see adult me seeing a kid who's like obviously looking kind of frightened or uncomfortable with a hug, or if I see a sibling or a cousin that is being asked about why you put on, what's going on? You've gotten so fat, darling, or you've lost weight, you look great. Why are you eating all that? And when are you going to have a kid? And
Yep.
all of it.
Easiest line of defense is distraction. And so you might be able to come in and change topics or, make opportunity for, if it's an adult, that other adult to step away. The other thing too, that I say is if you have the ability to get that person, have like a side conversation of, hey, I noticed that this is happening. Is there anything that I can do to help you, support you, right? Give them their own lifeline if you can in that moment. Just really helping get consent from them as to whether or not they want to be rescued. Some people are okay just pushing through and getting through it, and it can be upsetting if they get rescued, at least for other adults. For kids, however, I am always a fan of stepping in and protecting the kids. So if you see kids being hugged when they're really physically uncomfortable, sometimes calling that out of, hey, little Susie, it looks like you maybe don't want a hug. Is there something else that you might want right now? And just, being able to voice that and say that out loud and labeling it. But for adults, it's, distraction, offering support if they're willing to accept it. And sometimes just stepping in. And if you feel comfortable or you feel like you can be on the front line of that, kind of stepping in front of the fire, if you will, to be able to protect those other family members.
Yeah. And good point about the gaining consent about being helpful, because it's a common thing for unsolicited support.
Uh-huh. Absolutely. I don't want to guess if somebody wants to be rescued, but if you're seeing these patterns play out over and over and over again, suggesting playing a game, suggesting a topic of conversation, inviting that family member to maybe help you with a project, giving them an out so they have the ability to accept it or not, really helps a lot.
Or this squirrel.
Yes, exactly. Pretend like you tripped and fell. Everybody's focused on you right now. Everybody forgot about the previous conversation.
Yeah. Oh, what about after?
After. So again, another topic that we think about oftentimes in like kinky or sexy settings, right? Aftercare. Aftercare can absolutely come in other parts of our lives. So once you're finally done with that dinner with your family, or you're done with the trip, what do you need to take care of yourself? And sometimes this can be stuff that you think about before the trip or before the dinner. And if not, as you're leaving, as you're stepping away, checking in with yourself about what it is you might need. For some people, it might mean turning up the music in the car, Grace Jones on the way out, if you will, and being able to have that physical release of letting it go. For some people, it might be quiet. For some people, it might mean a cozy robe or a weighted blanket, hot shower, cup of tea, a hug from somebody, all of those things that you may need to kind of help your nervous system regulate again once you're done with the chaos of family time.
What about what not to do for the after time?
Yeah, I don't recommend, you're going to notice this one coming up again, drinking or drug use, because what that does is it helps you just dissociate. Now, that doesn't mean that there's nothing wrong with, social drinking, having a drink here or there, but we don't want to use that as the primary means of trying to regulate after that. Because what we know is it doesn't help you process the event. Your sleep's going to be poorer. You're not really getting to feel your feelings and release from that experience. So we don't recommend that. I don't recommend like running away, whether it's physically or emotionally. I do recommend for people, as much as they're able, to think through what occurred, and also maybe doing some gratitude work. So going back to, again, something that you could do is, what went well during this? What exchanges did I feel good about? What was it that I was proud of myself for? So did I set a boundary? Even if my family members ignored it horribly, did I do a good job in that moment and giving yourself some credit? What I don't recommend is beating yourself up. So making sure that even after the fact, you've got some compassion for yourself. So being able to, I did the best that I could. I noticed that I've got some things for next time to prepare for, but not calling yourself names, going down a shame spiral, or really just engaging in that negative self-talk. That's not a good way to cope after family.
Nice. Now, actually, at this moment, I want to check the chat and see if we have questions or comments. So let's see what we got here. Um, so anyone who's here live, questions, comments for either myself or Amanda, uh, and are you finding any of these suggestions helpful?
Mhm.
And is there any other ways in which we can give you some support around this, which is why we have Amanda here. Um, do you have some, obviously anonymized, generalized, and all that? Do you have some like victory case studies, examples you might be able to share?
Absolutely. A lot of clients. So again, I work with a caseload that tends to have high trauma. I think 95% of my caseload has PTSD. And most of them, there's roots of that in their childhood. And so some of the biggest successes, I worked with an individual whose family of origin was really chaotic. And so what they did is, again, this is a little bit of a place of privilege, but when they went back to go visit family, they realized they did best staying in some place other than with their family. And they were in a place where they were able to stay in a hotel. So then they were able to limit that time with their family. They also did a really good job of stepping away. There was a family got into a big fight. Client was able to step away into the kitchen to not have to worry about that. And when they heard things settle down, they were able to rejoin. They just did a really good job of making themselves scarce whenever the chaos increased, because we can't always fix the family, right? We can't always do that part, but what we can do is decide how much we're willing to put up with. And so this client in particular skipped the last day of the family events. They were ill. I don't always recommend not being honest, but in this situation, it allowed them to stay away from a situation that was not the healthiest.
I could see this where I'm sick, I'm feeling sick. I'm actually sick and tired of you all.
Uh-huh, yeah, right. There's a kernel of truth there.
Um, okay, how about the How about this? Of it's a family tradition for to get together for this, that, or the other holiday, and you're expected to be there.
Mhm.
Should you always say yes?
Ah, anytime there's a should in a question,
Mhm.
there's already an implicit judgment, right? So I am not a fan of we'll say shooting on ourselves, if you will. So I don't think that we should feel obligated. And so if it's something where the family is saying you should be there to drive around and look at Christmas lights, right? And then you should be there for hot cocoa, and then you should be there for breakfast. No, you are allowed to say, I'm able to be there for this and this. Thank you so much for the invitation. And there might be a consequence for that. But what we get to decide is it worth it to say no and deal with the fallout, right? Or is it more worth it to be able to say yes to it all and have to push through it, right? We kind of get to figure
Yeah.
out our own risk cost benefit here, like kind of that cost benefit analysis of what's worth it to us, but never just automatically saying yes because we are expected to be there, or acting out of obligation. That's not the healthiest.
Speaking of obligation and shooting all over ourselves, the expectation that if a question is asked,
Hmm.
we must answer it.
Hmm. Yeah. I'm a big fan of always responding. So I'm not a fan of ignoring people unless it's somebody that's come around and asked and you've said, I am not comfortable having this conversation, or I'm not comfortable being there, right? If they're nagging you, the boundary might be, if you continue to ask me, I may stop responding. Or my favorite is asked and answered. That's the reply if they're asking you over and over again. Asked and answered is absolutely borrowed from a parenting approach, but it works with family as well when you've given an answer previously.
What was that again?
Asked and answered. And that
Oh,
is,
okay, so that's the response.
yep, that's your response. If somebody is almost nagging you for something, you can say asked and answered.
Okay, so let me role play here. So I'm, Aunt Mabel. Now, Amanda, darling, so when are you going to finally get married, and like, make some grandkids for your mom? I mean, really.
Hmm. And that one absolutely can be, oh, that does not feel like a comfortable conversation. That feels entirely personal. Now, if you have something specific you'd like to ask me, that would be great, but I really don't feel comfortable talking about the contents of my uterus in the middle of the dinner table.
Okay, fine. Then who are you dating? Are you seeing anyone right now? I mean, I don't see anyone sitting at the table with you.
And you can absolutely say, I don't really feel like talking about that right now. I'd really much rather talk about something interesting.
What about when and families hit on you're having a you're doing fine, the food's being served, and then not a conversation to you, but at a conversation at the table turns to something that is deeply offensive or upsetting.
Hmm. And that is one of those that we can choose whether or not we're going to speak up. I tend to be somebody who, based on my skill set and based on where I'm at in my life, I may object to the conversation that's happening and say, the way that this was worded might be, racist or sexist or problematic in some way. I'm okay being in a position of taking some blowback for standing up for that and pulling out, my soapbox. Not everybody is going to be in that position. And so they can try to change the topic. Sometimes we can respond to problematic wording and not repeat that wording, but we might be able to shift the wording just a little bit without people at the table noticing that we did. Especially if you have other accomplices at the table that will also participate in changing the language. That's helpful, especially when, Uncle Frank is going to start bringing up all the problematic politics of the world. And you always have the ability to step out of the room. That's a great time to go ahead and go back to that adult timeout that we were just talking about.
Let's see, there's some comments in the chat that I'd like to take a look at here. Someone said these tips have been helpful. Yay.
That's
Another says This has been enormously helpful, particularly adding to my arsenal of ways to tell my mom that we are not going to talk about my body. I'm 51 and have been telling her this for half my life now.
Absolutely.
I got somebody else who says, thanks for this presentation. How do you deal with people who have narcissistic tendencies who are immediate family? What is a good script to make them leave us alone? I wonder what an example might that be.
That one that I see or hear quite a bit is
Mhm.
when family members may present past situations in a way that absolves them of any responsibility, right? Oh, you remember that big Thanksgiving fight of 1991, right? It was so ridiculous the way that you behaved. Not owning the fact that they were behaving in the ways that they were, right? Narcissistic tendencies are really, really hard. Oftentimes that might look like that person not having empathy for the people around them. It might look like somebody not taking responsibility. It can look like blaming or shaming or using guilt tripping or gaslighting. And we're not going to change that person and their behavior, but what that might look like is reiterating your boundaries, like we've talked about before. I'm really not comfortable with this topic. It might look like, oh, this, it sounds like you and I might remember that situation a little bit differently. And I don't want to tell you that you're wrong, but I don't really feel comfortable going along with how you're talking about that having happened because I do remember it really differently. So is there maybe a different topic that we can talk about? I'm a big fan of distraction, distraction, distraction in those situations because you're
Mm.
oftentimes not going to get that other person to change how they're responding.
Got a great question here, and one that is like a big step, I think. What advice can Amanda give when you are working up to setting boundaries which you've never set before with your family members, and you know that they're going to call you on it?
Yes, that's a common situation. So, one of the things that I do talk about is if you know ahead of time that you're going to set that boundary, talk about it out loud, whether it's to somebody else or even to yourself or to your cat. So just work on talking about it, write about it, because if we can talk about it and we can write about it and we can think about it, we're processing it in all sorts of different ways. And that helps kind of get those neurons firing. We're starting to build a new habit with ourselves. The other thing is reminding yourself why you're taking this risk. Why are you setting this boundary for yourself? Why is it important to stand up for yourself in this way? Because what you're doing is you're increasing your follow through on it because you're reminding yourself about why you're important, why you're going to deal with that blowback. The other thing is if you know you're going to get some pushback or you're going to get called out for it, just be prepared to reiterate, reiterate, reiterate. Be prepared to repeat it as much as you need to. And if they keep pushing back on it, practicing that, I really do feel like I'm done talking about why I've asked you. And I think I might need to step away for a little bit. And if you're not willing to respect this boundary that I have set, we might be kind of done talking for tonight. And we can try again tomorrow.
And hopefully that to the person who asked that, um, if ask us more if more elaboration or specificity is needed. Of course, I'm thinking towards my relatives. I don't necessarily call them family. My relatives. I'm thinking of, and of course, I'm thinking first person as well as my clients as well as my friends and all that. I've got one relative that, and he is somebody that because of his demographics, age, gender, color, etc., holds definitely uh, unspoken power in the room,
Mm-hmm.
right? And he uses that like a cudgel
Mm-hmm.
and will keep going on seems his favorite topic is like figuring out figuring out who's got how much money. But here's a person who uh, because of the social bias and the position within
Mhm.
the relatives, owns the room in that unspoken power.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Advice?
So sometimes in those situations, depending on the makeup of the family and who's going to be there, sometimes having a different conversation with other people. So this individual that has positions of power can go ahead and have their conversation, right? And you can go ahead and have a side conversation over here, right? It might mean stepping into a different room entirely. Now, if this is somebody, though, who is really kind of using that position of power almost as a hammer to everybody else in the room, sometimes, again, if you feel like you are in a place where you're able to take this risk, calling it out gently can help. So, I'm really tired of talking about what everybody is making. I'd really rather hear, we're all here for Thanksgiving. I'd really like to hear something that everybody's grateful for from this last year. Or, we're near the end of the year. I'd really rather talk about what everybody's looking forward to next year. It's so not fun to talk about who has and who doesn't have in this room. I'm over that, being able to kind of laugh and uh, be dismissive in a way that might be respectful, or at least really signaling like we're over this conversation, can be helpful. But again, not everybody may feel confident or comfortable stepping in front of the situation like that. So being able to take a time out, or that might be when you take a walk around the block with the cousins. That might be when you offer to help Aunt Mary wash the dishes in the other room. So kind of deciding your own comfort level of, do you feel comfortable distracting, calling out the behavior, or do you need to just step away and get out of Dodge?
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Let's see if there's any other questions here. Keep them coming in the comments too. Something just crossed my mind, and where did it just go? Woo-hoo, hoo-hoo, hoo-hoo. Oh yeah, strategy that I've given to some of my coaching clients,
Mhm.
uh, and and works for particular individuals, is to also have an internal role of a cultural observer,
Yes.
and to like pretend that you're a cultural observer and to analyze the power dynamics in the room.
Mhm.
So I've asked somebody to, okay, I want you to be a Martian anthropologist. I want you to be Jane Goodall. That
Mhm.
one's funny because
I can imagine.
yeah, be Jane Goodall and analyze the power dynamics of this particular primate cluster.
Absolutely. Just being able to be a casual observer helps you stay present in that situation, but you're not necessarily on the front lines of observing it. The one thing that I do warn people with that is, if you're going to do that, you may find that you have to step into that observation role and then step back into the mindfulness of the moment, so that you don't start getting separated from the experience or checking out from the experience too much. So I often will say we might want to kind of pendulate is the word that I use. So you might be able to step out and observe, and then come back in and be an active participant, and then go back to being an observer.
For the one particular student of mine, the Jane Goodall example uh, served a more amusing version of how they say that giving a public speech, imagine everyone naked. I really don't need, and that doesn't, it's funny, but it doesn't.
Yeah, I don't want
But
to do that
if
with
we
family.
no, and I don't. And for those of you all who've been to my public classes, I am not imagining any of y'all naked, because that like mentally feels unconsensual. But for this particular coaching student, um, sciencey brain, right? And by reminding her that we are mammals and primates and have group behavior, and it was kind of like it it was just a bit of that. It gave a little humor.
Absolutely. The other thing that it can help is, again, kind of going back to that pendulating idea. If you're able to
Hmm.
step back and step into observer role for a little bit, you can observe the patterns that are playing out without participating in them. And if you notice some of those old patterns are starting to play out, you can be an active participant in moving it outside of that usual pattern. Or, if you're noticing a certain pattern start to play out and you know that that's a pattern for you that's pretty triggering, you can step away before it gets triggering. So that observer role can be really, really powerful in helping you protect yourself, whether it's just because
Oh, yes.
you get to step outside of it or because you can step away from it.
Hmm. And recognizing patterns,
Mm.
right? Now, there's a neat little form that you got.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I did just notice we got another question that popped up.
Oh,
Uh,
oh,
and
yes, yes, yes.
talking about split homes. So there was a question here about any recommendations for split homes when parents put the kids against the other parent as adults or as children. Example, mother speaking terrible things about a father. And so that's a really great question. And it's something that happens. It happens to, kids that we might be step parenting, or it might happen when we go back to our own families of origins of divorced or separated parents. And I'll be honest, sometimes it happens even when families are even intact. They may talk badly about one another even when they're in the same house. The biggest thing that I tell people is you have to do the best that you can of setting that limit of, I'm really uncomfortable hearing you talk about dad like that. I still spend time with him. And this sounds like that's something that's between you and him. I really don't feel comfortable dealing with this right now. And if it's something where a child that you are co-parenting is experiencing that, you can also start to help the children practice those boundaries. And it might be something where a conversation does have to happen with the other parent about this is happening. It's making our kid feel really uncomfortable. I know that, we don't, think fondly of one another, but if we can leave that between us and leave the kiddo out of it, I think that really is the best. So again, we don't get to dictate what somebody else does. In both of those situations, the other person may continue to do their thing. As adults, we have the ability to step away or to leave the situation. Kids don't always have that. And so oftentimes that would be a question for a lawyer, oftentimes in that situation. But arming that kiddo to the best of their abilities to be able to stand up for themselves, talking to the other parent. And as adults, us knowing that we can say, I'm really kind of tired of hearing about this. I'm going to step away. And again, I know I have the privilege of being able to say this not in the family situation, right? But there's a lot of rehearsal there that goes into that. I can tell you that when I have been in situations, I've used almost these exact same words because I practice them.
Nice, nice. Now, that
Yes.
form.
Yes, absolutely. So a big piece of homework, if I can offer people, is thinking about those parts of our life that we want to work on, that we want to increase our boundaries. And so I have a little form here that we can work on. And so one of the things that I tell people is first thing that you want to do is practice identifying a boundary that's being crossed. And so I've got some examples on here. These are not family related, but we can make them family related. So I'll take this first one here. I have a cousin that has a habit of telling me jokes that are racially or sexually degrading. Comments are at odds with my values and beliefs and are causing me to dread being around this family member. And so that example in particular, I can start to put together a plan of how I might handle this. So I'm going to discuss the jokes in the comments with a family member and let them know how it makes me feel. I will let the family member know that I prefer not to hear these jokes in the future. And I might add on to that, that if the jokes continue to happen, I may leave the situation or I may highlight the fact that these jokes are continuing to happen. So you can kind of come up with these for yourself. The biggest thing that I tell people is we have to start off with being honest with ourselves, because oftentimes if we're talking about chaotic or traumatic families of origin, part of sticking it through, part of being able to work through it is kind of minimizing our own experiences. So the first thing is you want to be honest with yourself so that you are able to be honest with other people. So define that boundary that's being crossed for yourself so that you can do that for other people. We want to make sure that we're communicating it with them so that if they do continue to cross that boundary, we have the ability to remind them, and being able to maintain those boundaries by saying, hey, I've said I'm not really comfortable talking about this topic. If you have told them about that boundary, you have reiterated that boundary, you've worked on maintaining that boundary, and individuals or an individual continues to cross it, you get to kind of have the decision for yourself of what you're going to do. And so oftentimes for people that might be going to limited contact, or in some more extreme situations, going no contact where you kind of don't respond anymore to those people. The other thing too is once you start noticing your boundaries and once you start noticing what you're comfortable with, you get to also notice those people in your life that do a really good job of honoring your boundaries and respecting your boundaries. And so what I tell people is oftentimes when you start doing this work, you can actually thank those people in your life that do a good job of respecting your boundaries and honoring them. And it also helps you highlight and see times when other people are setting boundaries around you so that you can increase your own understanding and honoring, respecting those boundaries of other people around you.
Question for you. Given that this is on the screen, this is great and helpful. Are you okay if folks take a screenshot of this?
Absolutely. Please do.
And is this is something you developed?
Yes. Yep. I developed this back in the day when I used to work running an IOP PHP. So
Okay,
yes.
so I'm gonna give a moment for folks to screen capture or take a photo of the screen, especially for those who are here live. And if you're looking at this later on, just pause it. Let's see. And how has this list been received?
Really well. One of the things that I like using this with clients and using this with people is that it really does give us that ability to take those first steps of identifying what's being crossed. And then once we know what's being crossed, we can start to identify how we're going to tackle it and what we're going to do about it, which then opens up the door to start doing some rehearsal. I can't start rehearsing how I'm going to respond to my boundaries being crossed unless I know what boundaries are being crossed. So that really is the first step. And a worksheet like that really helps us practice and rehearse it.
And so this is the homework that you are giving us. And it looks like something that's going to be super helpful for family trauma season, as well as just dealing with humans
Absolutely.
in
And it's
general.
about reframing the boundaries. This really is you getting to give consent opportunities to the people around you and honoring your own ability to give or not give consent to family situations.
Excellent. I'm going to give a moment to invite questions, comments, uh, and well, speaking of gratitude, any gratitude towards Amanda for taking this time. And I invite you all for putting that in the chat, or yeah, put it in the chat. And what else would you like to impart in this episode of Consent Dojo?
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing that I can tell people is this really is a normal experience. We know that the majority of people, I think it was one of the research studies I looked at said 85% of people avoid at least some of the time with their family. It doesn't mean they're avoiding the entire holiday, but they might avoid some of it. So the feelings that you're having are not uncommon. You are not alone in this experience. And so, just make sure that you're doing what you need to do to take care of yourself and honoring yourself wherever it is that you're at. And holiday season will end and you will get to the other side of it.
Good to know. And for those who are working with mental health professionals and therapists, or thinking about mental health professionals or therapists, how would you advise we bring this up with our therapists or future therapists?
Absolutely. I always am a fan of talking pretty directly. So just letting your therapist know that, it might mean, hey, I've got some stuff from my childhood that I have to talk about. It might be, I am finding myself absolutely dreading New Year's, Christmas, Hanukkah with my family. I need a space to talk this through. And letting your therapist know that it's going on, because then we get to help take the reins of figuring out what that might mean for our clients and what skills might be useful, and kind of do some assessment from there. But you got to let us know that it's a problem in order for us to know what to do with it.
Great. Yeah. And comment here. Thanks so much for this conversation. Another writes, thank you. This has been great discussion. Now, I would like to bring this episode to a close, but Amanda, and team, I'm gonna ask you to stick around for after we're done with this, so I can catch up with you a little bit. And last call for questions and comments, queries, and please remember that I'm going to put this out in the fhp-inc.com/Consent Dojo. It's also in my YouTube. Give me a few days because it's family drama season and I need a few days to catch up on work, but it will be in the YouTube stream. And I also want to give a special thanks to my Patreon subscribers, because this is made possible in experimental projects and projects where I am, well, not getting paid by anyone, is made possible by the subscribers of my Patreon. So thank you for allowing me to do this investigative work. And yeah, my Patreon folks have been great. Now, consent, as Amanda's been talking about, is something that needs constant practice. It's like going to the gym, which I haven't been good about lately, and just exercising. I need to do some more of that. I've not been good about it. But unlike my workout habits, that consent muscle is something that needs to get worked on a daily basis, and we don't have to do it all at once, just a little bit at a time, so we don't break ourselves. And this is why we've got these nice homework. Please look at other episodes for other homework and good tips and ideas. And I have coming up a next episode in January. Oh my God, next year.
Mhm.
I have a CEO of a dating and social platform coming on to talk about how consent might be navigated and enforced by a platform. And I may have some other interesting guests coming up. So again, big thanks for my Patreon for making this possible. And for those of you who might be interested in sponsoring Consent Dojo, drop me a line. Okay. Keep building that consent muscle. And I'm going to stop the recording. See you in another episode.
Thank you.